Sometimes when you take a photograph, you may use a fairly wide aperture setting, and that can create a very shallow depth of field. So if you zoom into this horse, for example, you can see that the body is nice and sharp. You can see all the detail there. But if we go to the face, it's a little bit blurred, and that's partly also because the horse is moving and there's a little bit of motion blur there. So we need to sharpen up the horse's face, because that's the detail that people will look at first. You tend to go for the eyes of anything in a shot, including horses, I presume. But it is slightly blurred. Now, sharpening works by increasing the contrast around the edge of details in the scene, and I'll show you how to do that with this horse without adding nasty sharpening artifacts. And it's a very simple tool that you're going to use. Before we do that though, let's just get the layers palette up. You can get that by going to Window Layers, and let's just duplicate the horse layer by dragging it to the Create New Layer icon. And we're going to sharpen the new layer, and then we can compare the before and the after versions by turning the little eye icon on and off. So that's a good tip as well. If we make mistakes, we can always go back to the original layer quite easily. You'll find the start file, which is called sharpeningbefore.jpg, on your CD. So go to File, Open, and bring that into Photoshop. And then to sharpen, let's go to Enhance, Adjust Sharpness, and the Adjust Sharpness command window opens. And by default, it's got some settings here that will actually sharpen it, and it also sets the image to 100% so you can actually see how sharp the pixels really are if you view it at actual size. Now, to see what the sharpening is doing at the default settings, click to hold down the mouse, and you can see the before version. Let go, and there's the after. Before and after. So even at an amount of 100%, that's 100% on the contrast change, it's bringing out a little bit more detail in the eye. If we move on to something else like these flowers here, there's the before, there's the after. So you can see there's a little bit of sharpness there too on those areas, but we're really interested in the problem area around the eye, so let's keep that in view. So amount increases contrast, and if you go too far, you can end up with artifacts like picture noise. If I move over here, you can see some noise in the flowers there, and you've also got blown out highlights too, which is another artifact you'll get if you push amount too far. The contrast change is too strong, and the highlights have become clipped, blown out, there's no detail on them. There's the before, and there's the very dramatic after, and all the noise as well is showing up, especially in areas like sky. So if you've got a high ISO setting, then it will bring out that if you go too far. So those are the artifacts to look out for with the amount setting, noise and contrast change. So let's take that back down to 100% for the moment, and you can see a much more subtle before and after. So that's amount. Next slider to look at is radius. Now this increases the spread of the contrast change around the edges of objects in the scene. For example, if we take that right up to a quite high value like maybe 25, you can see that the black edge around the eye has spread out and it's created a kind of black halo. If we look at the horizon there, you can see that we've got a white horizon, this halo clinging to the edges here, and that is very noticeable. So halos are artifacts that you get with the radius too strong, and you're also of course blowing out highlights around other areas of the shot as well, so it's clipping the highlights and causing nasty halos. So as a rule, you don't want to set radius any higher than 2, but let's go back to the default one for the moment. So let's sharpen this shot up without adding artifacts, and to do that we're going to set amount to 140%, so you can just drag it to the right, round about here. There's the before, there's the after, and then just increase the spread of the contrast change a little bit to create more impact on those details, and push radius up to about 1.4. As a rule, again, don't go above 2 because you start to increase artifacts, so 1.4 should be fine. There's the before, there's the after. We have to bear in mind that other parts of the shot are sharp, like the back here, so we see the before and the after. It's restoring a little bit more detail there without creating artifacts in these areas. So it's a compromise setting that brings out a little bit more detail in the blurred areas here. Now you've got some other sliders and controls like the types of blur here. By default it sets itself to Gaussian blur, and that's usually fine, but you do have lens blur and motion blur as well. Now motion blur allows you to actually adjust the direction of the compensation for the blurring, but it's really difficult to use. It doesn't tend to work very well, and you can't really tell which way the horse is moving, so I think it's a bit of a gimmick really, but you might find it useful in very rare occasions. And more refined sounds good, but that tends to enhance noise, so I tend to never use that. Usually you can get the amount of sharpening you need using amount and radius. And when you're happy, click OK to apply the change. And then if you've duplicated the main layer, you can always go back to the zoom tool, click on 1 to 1, and then hold the spacebar down to get the hand tool, and then turn the top layer off. There's the before, turn it on, there's the after, so you can see the sharpening